and welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast and our deep dive into Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. My name is Art, and I've been the host of this read-along for really this past year, past 5 months, and I have enjoyed this so much. I say this all the time, but I really have enjoyed reading this book with you. We're going to do something again. The more I think about it, it might have to wait until the fall. I got a busy summer ahead, and I want to do some thinking and planning and plotting and get some booktube videos out. A lot of plans for the channel this summer. So I really hope that you will like and subscribe our channel and stay tuned for some great book discussion and interviews in the coming months. Just a quick word, if you don't follow along on my podcast, you can find those links below. The video versions of my podcast will be on this YouTube channel. There's also audio version available as well. All right, well, here we are at the end of all things. We'll be covering chapters 57 through 59, and we'll wrap up Pip's story. I'll have some thoughts at the end, as always, but I would love to know what you have thought about this reading, what you think about the story. Did you like the novel? Do you like the way it ends? All those things. Let me know, and I'd love to continue the conversation with you in the months ahead, as you are perhaps watching this after it's aired, and could be months from now, but I hope you've enjoyed it. All right, enough rambling from me. You're here to talk about Dickens, so grab your book. Let's dive in to Dickens. We'll begin with chapter 57, and after all of that Pip has gone through, and now he becomes sick, he says, "The late stress upon me had enabled me to put off illness, but not to put it away. I knew that it was coming on me now, and I knew very little else, and was even careless as to that." He's laying on the sofa, on the floor, different places. He's sick with a fever and exhausted. So, again, that vague Victorian sickness has struck Pip. And it could just be stress-induced illness. That certainly happens. But I think most of us know what that's like when you feel like a cold or a fever coming on, and you just got to get through this busy day or this busy week, and then you can go home and collapse, and it's like you're able to put it off. But then once you're able to collapse at home, it just hits you full force. And that's basically what has happened with Pip. He's gone through a lot, our boy Pip has. And as he is laying in bed, blurry and completely out of it, some police officers come and arrest Pip for debt. In this case, it was £123. Now, this is something Dickens would have been very, very personal with and very familiar with, as Dickens's father was arrested for debt when Dickens was a boy, and Dickens was sent to work at a blacking factory. It's a very heartbreaking moment in Dickens's life that in some way broke him and I think changed him and who he grew up to be. Pip is so consumed with his fever and illness, though, that he really has very little response to what is happening, and he sees these shadowy people coming in and out and around him. And eventually, he says that sooner or later, all these visions he had seemed to break down and appear into the likeness of Joe. And then finally, he is healthy enough to ask, "Is it Joe?" So here's how he realizes that it's been Joe who's been taking care of him all this time. "At last, one day, I took courage and said, 'Is it Joe?' And the dear old home voice answered, 'Which it are, old chap?' Oh, Joe, you break my heart. Look angry at me, Joe. Strike me, Joe. Tell me of my ingratitude. Don't be so good to me." For Joe had actually laid his head down on the pillow at my side and put his arm round my neck, in his joy that I knew him. "Which dear old Pip, old chap?" said Joe. "You and me was ever friends, and when you're well enough to go out for a ride, what larks!" After which Joe withdrew to the window and stood with his back towards me, wiping his eyes. As my extreme weakness prevented me from getting up and going to him, I lay there, penitently whispering, "Oh, God bless him. Oh, God bless this gentle Christian man." This is a very, very touching reunion, and so emotionally satisfying based on everything that Pip and Joe have gone through together, and how Pip has treated Joe in the past, and that Joe continued to be a dear good friend to Pip. And here again, we know the physical strength of Joe, but he's described as being tender He's weeping for Pip. He is comforting Pip. He is being that what we often think of as maternal care that we subscribe to women, but Joe is filling that role, which I think is wonderful to see. And part of what makes this story so stick out so much to me is Dickens is going against what is typical. And I'm also amazed about how gentle Joe can still be, considering all that he's experienced himself at the hands of Mrs. Joe and, just the hard life that he's led. Pip and Joe talk about how long he's been sick and the latest news. Biddy had taught Joe how to write, and he has this really amusing description of how he was writing a letter and to see the pride with which he writes. And again, that's a nice callback to before Joe knew how to write. Remember, with Mrs. Joe, he thought, I don't want to be too clever because then she'd beat me. She wants to keep me dumb. And he's like, I don't want to, bring in any more reasons for her to be angry. But now it sounds like Biddy has been helping Joe to learn to read and to write, and to see that that's okay and it's a good ability to have. And he takes great pride in it. He asks about Miss Havisham, and he finds out that Miss Havisham has passed and that she's left a large sum of money to Matthew Pocket, and that was a very good thing that she was able to do. As they're catching up, we get Orlick's end of Orlick's story as well, and Mr. Pumblechook. Mr. Pumblechook had continued to complain and whine that Pip had mistreated him, but Pumblechook's house had been broken into by Orlick. It says, "Is it Mr. Pumblechook's house that has been broken into, then?" "That's it, Pip," said Joe, "and they took his till, and they took his cash box, and they drinked his wine, and they partook of his victuals, and they slapped his face, and they pulled his nose, and they tied him up to his bedpost, and they give him a dozen, and they stuffed his mouth full of flowery annuals to prevent his crying out. But he knowed Orlick, and Orlick's in the county jail. Orlick's been arrested for assault and battery, robbery, what have you. Maybe in some way, Mr. Pumblechook got his comeuppance there too." And then we get a really great description here from future Pip. It says, "For the tenderness of Joe was so beautifully proportioned to my need that I was like a child in his hands. He would sit and talk to me in the old confidence and with the old simplicity and in the old unassertive protecting way, so that I would half believe that all my life since the days of the old kitchen was one of the mental troubles of the fever that was gone." Joe, when Pip was feeling well enough, they went for a ride, and as he's describing, the scenes that he sees, the country scenes, and how good they're making him feel, it says that, "When I heard the Sunday bells and looked around a little more upon the outspread beauty, I felt that I was not nearly thankful enough, that I was too weak yet to be even that, and I laid my head on Joe's shoulder as I had laid it long ago when he had taken me to the fair or where not, and it was too much for my young senses." I love that description that, he's talking about when he was a kid and maybe his senses had been overwhelmed, or he had a long and exhausting day when he and Joe would travel somewhere, and he would lay with his head on Joe's shoulder, and that he's doing it now, as a young man, as an adult. And it's like he's finding refuge and strength in Joe. And I love that. I love that so much. It's just a beautiful, beautiful picture. And as Pip eventually becomes healthy again and gets his strength back, and then slowly Joe begins to start calling Pip Sir again, and eventually one day he wakes up and finds that Joe is gone. He found a letter on the table, and here's what the contents. He says, "Not wishful to intrude, I have departed, for you are well again, dear Pip, and will do better without Joe. P.S. Ever the best of friends." Enclosed in the letter was a receipt for the debt and costs on which I had been arrested. Down to that moment I had vainly supposed that my creditor had withdrawn or suspended proceedings until I should be quite recovered. I had never dreamed of Joe's having paid the money, but Joe had paid it, and the receipt was in his name. Pip realizes that Joe has paid for his debt and kept him out of prison. For whatever reason, Joe still thinks that they can't relate to each other. That Joe still sees Pip as a gentleman. The big question is, what does Pip do next? I love this. He thinks, basically, well, I'm going to go marry Biddy. As he's thinking about this, he says, he thinks he might say to her, Biddy, I think you once liked me very well, when my errant heart, even while it strayed away from you, was quieter and better with you than it ever has been since. If you can like me only half as well once more, if you can take me with all my faults and disappointments on my head, if you can receive me like a forgiven child, and indeed I am as sorry, Biddy, and have as much need of a hushing voice and a soothing hand, I hope I am a little worthier of you than I was. Not much, but a little. So, yeah, and he goes on talking about how he wants to go and propose to Biddy. And at this point, I'm like, wait, what? Okay. So he sets out to do that, and we get to the end of part 35? Yeah, end of part 35. And another cliffhanger. Even though we only have 2 more chapters left, Dickens is still able to leave us wanting more. And we know the story is going to end soon. But still, now we're waiting. Gotta wait a week to find out what happens. Is he going to propose to Biddy? Is she going to say yes? Or are we going to find out a rather surprising turn of events in the next chapter? Well, let's continue on. Chapter 58. The next morning, he runs into Mr. Pumblechook, and they enjoy a breakfast together. Mr. Pumblechook treats him with great condescension, and Pip is pretty blunt and rude with him in return. So Pip leaves and goes looking for Joe or Biddy, and he can't find them. The forge is empty, the schoolhouse is empty, and the mystery is starting to rise, and you're wondering if maybe some kind of tragedy has reared its ugly head at the last chapter. And he says, almost fearing, without knowing why, to come in view of the forge, I saw it at last, and saw that it was closed. No gleam of fire, no glittering shower of sparks, no roar of bellows, all shut up and still. But the house was not deserted, and the best parlor seemed to be in use, for there were white curtains fluttering in its window, and the window was open and gay with flowers. I went softly towards it, meaning to peep over the flowers, when Joe and Biddy stood before me, arm in arm. Pip sees him, and he's like, wow, you guys are dressed up so nicely. What's going on? And Biddy just bursts out. She says, it's my wedding day, cried Biddy in a burst of happiness, and I am married to Joe. Which is a plot twist that I didn't really see coming. But then as I look back over the story, I can see those little seeds that were planted along the way. This might not work for some of you. It might seem rather sudden. And yes, Joe is a bit older than Biddy is. But, it's I think it works. I kind of like this ending because Pip's attitude towards Biddy is basically like, she's going to be good for me. I might as well marry her. I need to marry someone. Maybe I'll marry her. I think that could be. I think what Joe and Biddy have would actually be genuine affection and love for each other. I think it'll be a good match. And he's grateful that he never told Joe his desire for that he would plan to maybe ask Biddy to marry him because, Joe is such a gentleman. He probably would have given Biddy up for for Pip. Joe is such a good man. I could see him doing that. And so Pip tells him, receive my humble thanks for all you have done for me, and all I have so ill repaid. And when I say that I am going away within the hour, for I am soon going abroad, and that I shall never rest until I have worked for the money with which you have kept me out of prison, and have sent it to you, don't think, dear Joe and Biddy, that if I could repay it 1,000 times over, I suppose I could cancel a farthing of the debt I owe you, or that I would do so if I could. So he's going to work hard to earn back the money, to do it right this time. And money that's been earned is often better used and better seen than money that's just given. He wishes them that if one day they have a son, that they would call the son Pip. He says, if that child, reminds you of me, he says, don't tell him, Joe, that I was thankless. Don't tell him, Biddy, that I was ungenerous and unjust. Only tell him that I honored you both because you were both so good and true, and that, as your child, I said it would be natural to him to grow up a much better man than I did. So Pip's acknowledging his past and then saying, if you do have a child, don't tell him of my faults. Tell him the good things. Tell him how much how good you guys were. And I gotta wonder if maybe this is also why he's writing this story now, is to give, as we find out that that Joe and Biddy do have children, that maybe he's writing the story for them. That here is the true story of what happened. This chapter ends with Pip going off to join Herbert and Clara, and we find out that Herbert's boss eventually does betray him, or in other words, reveal the information that Pip was the one who supplied Herbert with the money to be able to be established in this business, and that Pip arranged it from Miss Havisham, that whole connection there. The chapter ends, he says, "We were not in a grand way of business, but we had a good name and worked for our profits and did very well. We owed so much to Herbert's ever cheerful industry and readiness that I often wondered how I had conceived that old idea of his inaptitude, until I was one day enlightened by the reflection that perhaps the inaptitude had never been in him at all, but had been in me." And that is such an important quote here in these closing chapters, that Pip has learned his lesson, that he viewed Herbert as inept, but actually Herbert was very adept when given the chance, which is amazing. So often we write off people because of a certain, prejudice we have against them, or a certain preconceived idea, but you give them a chance, and they show who they really are, and it's amazing. Pip has learned a great and valuable lesson here. And I love that he says, we weren't rich, but we had a good name. Completely flipped from where he was before. And he worked for the profits they had, and they did well. And he's satisfied with what he has. To be honest, the next chapter is a bit controversial. For one, Dickens had a different ending when he first published it, and another author friend of his convinced him to change it to the ending that probably many of us read today. In the original ending, so I'm about to spoil chapter 59, but in the original ending, Pip and Estella do not get together. Dickens's friend convinced Dickens to change the ending to make it a little more happier, with at the very least the possibility of Pip and Estella ending up together. I really think, now that I hadn't ever thought of this before, but I think ending the book at chapter 58 would be a good and satisfying ending. There are some things that pop up in the last chapter that I like. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. Here's what happens. This is kind of like, this would almost work as one of those Marvel end credit scenes, okay? Let's imagine it like that. So 11 years later, Pip returns and meets Joe and Biddy again, and they have children and just a happy home, and it's really wonderful. Estella is brought up a little bit, and he says about this of her, he says, Biddy asks, "Have you forgotten about Estella?" And he says, "My dear Biddy, I have forgotten nothing in my life that ever had a foremost place there, and a little that ever had any place there. But that poor dream, as I once used to call it, has all gone by." Perhaps that obsession he's had with Estella is gone, and that's good. And in catching up on the news, he's heard of the death of her husband. So Drummle has died because he, as a consequence of his ill treatment of a horse. And this had happened about 2 years ago. And as he says, for anything I knew, she was married again. In the original ending, this is what happened, is that Pip one day runs into Estella, and they catch up, and she in fact did marry somebody, a doctor who helped her during the time when her husband was abusing her, and they ended up falling in love and getting married. And that was kind of the ending that Dickens had originally planned, and not such a bad ending. But the first few times I've read this, I'm such a hopeless romantic. I thought, no, Biddy or no, Pip and Estella should have gotten together. So here's the ending that we get, the different ending that we get, that is now the more popular ending, that I think is probably considered to be the official ending of the story. He goes back to Setta's house. It's pretty much in ruins. Everything much is the same, but he says, and I like this quote, he said, "I saw that some of the old ivy had struck root anew, and was growing green on low, quiet mounds of ruin. A gate in the fence standing ajar, I pushed it open and went in. So in all of this crumble and decay, he sees something green, something new starting to grow. And I wonder if maybe that's symbolizing hope for the future, that new things will grow there. And as he's wandering through the house, he comes across Estella. She's there as well. And I guess she owns it and she's about to sell it. So she came to say one final goodbye to the property. Here's how he sees her. He sees her and he says, "Estella." And she says, "I am greatly changed. I wonder you know me." The freshness of her beauty was indeed gone, but its indescribable majesty and its indescribable charm remained. Those attractions in it I had seen before. What I had never seen before was the saddened, softened light of the once proud eyes. What I had never felt before was the friendly touch of the once insensible hand. So as they're catching up, Pip realizes that she's changed, that she's gone through a lot, and it has had its impact on her, and that they are both very different people today than they were 10, 11, 12 years ago. Estella tells Pip that she has thought of him often. "Have you?" Pip asks. "Of late, very often. There was a long, hard time when I kept far from me the remembrance of what I had thrown away when I was quite ignorant of its worth. But since my duty has not been incompatible with the admission of that remembrance, I have given it a place. I have given it a place in my heart." "You have always held your place in my heart," I answered. "Aw, that's sweet." Is it though? But she realizes that she has mistreated him and thrown away something of great value that Pip was offering to give her, which is, love. Whether he had a good idea of love or not. But here we begin to see a lot of words popping up about taking leave and parting and leaving. So let's watch those as we read the final paragraphs. They were silent a while until she said, "I little thought," said Estella, "that I should take leave of you in taking leave of this spot. I am very glad to do so." So we get a real key word here in these closing chapters, or these closing sentences. Taking leave, being apart. "Glad to part again, Estella? To me, parting is a painful thing. To me, the remembrance of our last parting has been ever mournful and painful." That last meeting when she said she was going to marry Drummle, and he warned her, just, marry anybody else. It doesn't even have to be me, just anybody else, but not him. He's the worst. And that was very painful because then he had to live with knowing she was in a terrible relationship where she was cruelly treated, abused by this evil, wicked man. "But you said to me," returned Estella very earnestly, "God bless you, God forgive you. And if you could say that to me then, you will not hesitate to say that to me now." She's asking for his forgiveness. And I love this next part. She says, "Now, when suffering has been stronger than all other teaching, and has taught me to understand what your heart used to be, I have been bent and broken, but I hope into a better shape. Be as considerate and good to me as you were, and tell me we are friends." She understands now the trauma, the pain that she's given Pip because somebody else treated her in that very same way. It's heartbreaking to know that she had to go through that and to suffer. It made her into a better person. And I absolutely love this quote. What she suffered taught her to understand what his heart used to be, what his heart went through, how she cruelly treated him, and now she understands what he has experienced. And then she says this great quote. You've seen this everywhere. "I have been bent and broken, but I hope into a better shape." And that's everyone's story in this novel. Just about everyone's story. Miss Havisham, Estella, Pip, Magwitch even. They have been bent and broken, and either then they've died or they've been made into a better shape. "We are friends," said I, rising and bending over her as she rose from the bench, "and will continue friends apart," said Estella. So again, that idea that they're going to separate. But watch how the story ends. He says, I took her hand in mine, and we went out of the ruined place. And as the morning mists had risen long ago when I first left the forge, so the evening mists were rising now. And in all the broad expanse of tranquil light they showed to me, I saw no shadow of another parting from her. The end. So, what happened there? Do Pip and Estella spend happily ever after? Well, it's vague enough that it's really left up to the reader to make that determination. I think they do end up together, because here they are leaving from the shadows, from destruction of the house, to sprout and to grow. But as the sun is rising, as the mists are not the sun is rising, but as the mists are rising and the night is clearing, he says that the light showed to me, because again, remember that these mists and the mists of the marsh and the clouds kind of act as a vision into the future for Pip. They've done that several times throughout this book. What they show him is that there will be no shadow of another parting between them. Even though they said, I'm taking leave of you, we're going to continue friends apart, but the future reveals that, in fact, they are never parted again. I know some people don't like this ending because of the way that Estella treated Pip, and Pip kind of obsessed over Estella and all of that, but I really think this final chapter sells it. That it's because they have been broken and changed into better people, they're now able to love each other. And Estella realizes that what Pip was offering her was genuine, or could have been genuine love. Certainly not the love that she showed him, or that Drummle showed her, or that Miss Havisham for a while showed her. And she was attracted to that and drawn to that. And Pip understands too that even though he was being mistreated, he was not a good person either. And that the things he's experienced have changed him. So this is almost like two survivors of some kind of trauma that find each other and are able to heal together. That's my hope for them, is that they have learned valuable lessons and are able to establish a family together, a love together, and that Pip has Estella not as a object, or this is my consummation of being a gentleman, that this is the thing, that if I have her, then I will know I have attained and arrived. Whereas now I see it as that they are two hurt souls that have been brought together and will be able to help each other and grow with each other. Maybe I'm reading a lot into the text, and it's possible because, I like a happy ending. But if he's going to insist on Estella and Pip being together, that's how my headcanon justifies this. And I think I can live with that. Well, we've done it. We've made it through the book. And I have enjoyed it beyond words. I say this every week, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for coming along with me on this journey. This has been the best reading of this book that I've ever had. And like I don't even know how many times I've read this book, but I've read it deeper. I've read it with more joy, with more heartache, with more confusion, with more moments of enlightenment. I don't know. It's really meant so much. Thank you all for reading and commenting. Also want to just give a very special thank you to Carol, who joined me on a couple of videos to discuss the chapters. And Carol, that was so fun. Thank you. I wish my timetable would have worked out for us to be able to do a third one. Deborah on her channel, Book In with Deborah, has given me several shout outs over these last few months, and has been reading along with us as well and leaving a lot of good comments. There are others that I can't think of off the top of my head, so I apologize, but read the comments, see the people who are active. Thank you, folks, so much. What a great book this was. So where are we going next? Probably in over the next few months, I'll be, like I said, be releasing some booktube videos, some other book discussion videos I have. I've got some author interviews lined up I'll be sharing as well. And so probably around August or I'd say probably around August, we'll plan to start a new book, and we'll get some vote. I think I'll start a vote, see what you would like to do next. So August or maybe September, we'll plan for our next read along. And if you have ideas, go ahead and let me know. And I'll put them on a list. I'll make a list together, and we'll kind of go from there. And I hope this has inspired you to read more Dickens. His books are worth it. Even the lesser known Dickens are good books to read. His stories are incredible. The things he wants to tell us and make us aware of are things that are worth listening to. I think the thing that's really struck me the most about this time reading it is the storyline of injustice, how Magwitch was just poorly treated because he fit a certain description. And, that brings up all of my thoughts about racism and racial profiling and institutional racism, all those things that make me want to be better and do better in our society, and to not judge somebody just because of their appearance, or even those who might be caught in crime, whether it's stealing or drugs or alcohol abuse, things like that. There may be a very good and valid reason they are caught up in those things. And it's not just because they're a terrible person and ought to be thrown into prison, but maybe somebody treated them unfairly and poorly, and that's the only way they can find to cope. I don't know, a lot of thoughts there we could unravel, but let's think about that for now. And how can this story help us become a better person? This book is in my top 10 list of best books ever. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming along with me on this deep dive into Charles Dickens's Great Expectations. So until next time, happy reading. Take care.